everybody. Welcome to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm your host, Christine Courtney. And today I have a very special guest in the studio today. And that is my friend, my pal, an ever-changing and interesting leader in our midst, and that is Scott Goodson. Just to know a little bit about Scott as we go into this conversation, he is a New York-based marketer, author, change maker, founder, and chairman of Strawberry Frog, where he pioneered movement thinking, which we'll talk a little bit about. Applying the mechanics of social movements to help brands activate purpose, shift culture, and really drive growth. He's the author of Uprising and the co-author of Activate Brand Purpose, and he co-hosts Inc. Magazine's Planet Purpose podcast. Welcome, Scott.
Well, thank you so much, Christine. We purposely designed that to be more complex than Peter Piper picked a pack of pickled peppers. You have to say it 5 times really quickly.
Well, the thing I need to also tell people is how I met Scott, because we are friends and we live in the same town. And when I moved to this town almost 7 years ago now, he was at the first dinner party I ever went to. And then he had us over to a dinner party at his house with the most amazing people. And I thought to myself, when we were at that table, I thought, wow, this is a cool place to live. This is a lot of interesting people. And Scott is very good at cultivating really interesting people and curating them around the same tables, I would say. And in addition to that, he stopped the conversation at one point and said, okay, I want everybody to tell, I don't remember the exact words you said, but to tell their origin story. One origin story about them from wherever they were. And all these people happen to be from all over the world, right? I mean, lots of different places except for me. And it was so cool to just go around the table at a dinner party where mostly people are always just talking in little groups, and to have one big conversation with like 12 people about some origin story that they wanted to share. And it was a night of storytelling with some of the most interesting people. And I'll never forget some of those stories. So anyway, that's how I met Scott. And I was like, I got to be friends with this guy and I got to learn from him. So thanks, Scott, for coming on.
My pleasure. What an introduction.
Well, you're a special person.
Thank
All right.
you.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about how, I'd love to hear your origin story a little bit of how you even got into marketing in the first place. Like, I don't know if people are born marketers, or how'd you even start Strawberry Frog or get this idea? I know Karen's involved in this, but.
It was through a woman who killed her husband in Australia. She was in prison for 25 years. And I met her in France and we started talking, and I'd graduated from college/university, depending on where you're hearing this podcast. That reference will make an impact. And I'd never met anyone who had been in prison. And she'd killed her husband because he was physically violent with her. And in those days, I know it's 1,000 years ago, back in the 1980s, if a woman killed her husband in self-defense, she went to prison for life. And so she had been in that situation. And I wanted to write a movie about this woman. It was a fascinating story. So anyway, long story short, I traveled with her and her friend, who also was in prison for, I think, 15 years for bank robbery. This was, of course, years before Thelma and Louise, the movie, came out. So I thought I was on to something. And we ended up going to an island in Greece, and they were much older than I was. I was in my 20s. They were in their 50s. So it was really about me trying to kind of understand these 2 women. And anyway, she introduced me to Karen, who I immediately fell in love with. And fast forward, I'm living in Sweden with her, my wife, Karen, who I met through this woman, Maureen. I don't think she's still alive because she was in her 50s back in the 80s. So she's 100 and something. Maybe she'll sue the lawsuit for me using her name. But anyway, through her, I ended up moving to Sweden, and I needed a job. And I grew up with a mother who was the creative director of Canada's Saks Fifth Avenue, and a father who owned an advertising agency and a publishing company. And I really didn't want to work in communications and marketing. I wanted to do something infinitely more respectable, like being a lawyer. Anyway, that didn't work out. So I did take I needed, necessity is the mother of invention. So I invented myself into marketing, and I got a job in Stockholm, Sweden. Ended up living there for a decade. I bought an agency when I was 26 and built it into an international company. And basically, Sweden was and probably still is a country that is advanced technically. It's also a country that is very, not purpose driven per se, but they really believe in a company having an idea that's much bigger than just making money. And so it was a really great education for me to see that. And then I applied that way of thinking from Sweden in international marketing. So it's kind of a combination of my original Canadian upbringing, strong work ethic, curiosity, interest in technology, moving to Sweden and adopting, the positive aspects of the Swedish marketing culture to build a new kind of business, which started in Amsterdam together with my wife, Karen, who's.
So when you guys started, did you take like, as some people do, like as a startup, do you take everybody and you're just like a regular marketing firm, or did you always start with this idea of purpose, or was it really just taught to you because of the Swedish culture? It was just ingrained in the businesses you worked with. And then when you came over to New York, you just said, why aren't people doing this more? And started to apply that. Like how was that formed, do you know?
You can't succeed unless you have a really interesting origin story, and that differentiates you from the competition, and that creates positive bias in the marketplace, momentum, attention, all those things. So unless you craft, and at the time, there were all these big corporate advertising companies, and a lot of the articles in the media at the time were all about how big and bloated and slow and expensive these companies were. So we created a company that was the antithesis of that. It was the Strawberry Frog, which was a small little red frog with blue legs. So it's a rebel with genes. And the Strawberry Frog, which happens also to be poisonous and effective, can dance around this lumbering dinosaur who's slow, bureaucratic, and has sticky saliva. So when it spits out small ideas, they tend not to go very far. So,
Sticky.
yeah. Well, we started to paint a picture of the competition instead of looking at them from above and from below and think, oh, they're so unassailable. They're so great. They're so big. They're so full of money. They can beat us a million times. We started to paint them as in their worst light. Slow, bureaucratic, all the things that lead to bad creativity, expensive, etc. How many dinosaurs does it take to screw in a light bulb? That kind of stuff. And we would start every meeting that way, and clients would laugh, and then they would award us their business, and we would beat the biggest of the biggest in the world. And we won the global Heineken business. We won the global Emirates airline business. We won Google globally. We won Pampers globally. We started picking up the largest pieces of business in the world. And it really, came from that idea.
Yeah.
Leadership idea.
Yeah, it is a leadership idea. And I was thinking, like, the people listening
a
to
peacock idea.
It is like looking up and going, instead of being intimidated by this, like, let me go after it. It's the David and Goliath story. It's like, let me see what I can throw up at you that's going to somehow topple you down from your heaviness. So, when you start to create this and you start going and you start talking to people about this movement, did you find yourself having to change the minds of some executives that hired you to try to get them into this movement, or did they just join you because that's the kind of thinking that they wanted anyway for their brand? You know what I mean? Did you have to do a lot of convincing of them, or you just didn't choose to work with them?
The sales process starts with the first words out of your mouth or the first letter you write to them. So even if you're in a pitch scenario, or especially when you're in that situation where you're being compared to others, I mean, you're always being compared to others, but in a actual pitch situation where you're actually against two or three competitors, you have to differentiate. Otherwise, you're part of the problem. I would say most of the people, almost all the people that we wooed and won over or acquired as clients, intuitively felt that the old system was expensive, slow, bureaucratic, and all the stuff that I said. We just crystallized it for them and made it fun and poked fun at the big competitors. And I think, the truth was I'd spent a decade doing that in Sweden. Sweden doesn't believe in big corporate advertising agencies or big corporate having to spend a lot of money for basically what is in effect a security blanket that you hold and feel like, oh, thankfully I have this and I'm not going to get in trouble when I work internationally. So I need a corporate agency. No, you need three people. You need a strategist. You need a person who can run the business and run budgets, and you need a creative/technology person who can figure out ways to engage people, and everything else you can buy, in on a timely basis. Everything else is irrelevant. So I think that's what we showed them that we could do. And if you show them, and you do that for one iconic global brand, you can do it for every single one. So, that was 27 years ago. I think it's very much not only relevant today, but I would even argue it's 10 times more important, because now with AI, everyone can sound really smart, even if they're really stupid. Everyone can, in an instant, articulate a smart, differentiating idea compared to you. In fact, you can go into any situation. You can go, through AI, you can figure out who your competitors are, and you can find ways of differentiating amongst that, specifically that tiny group. So you need to, I would say, even go bigger. And I think you need to think of either you're going to be a peacock or you're going to be a duck. And if you're going to be a duck, you will not succeed in this world. This world is not being created for ducks. Ducks will disappear. Peacocks have inherent in their plumage a survival strategy. It is a survival, this pomposity that you see in front of you, this incredibly fluorescent color scheme on the peacock, is designed to attract a mate and to ward off predators and threats. That is a strategy for survival. That is the strategy you need as a leader in 2026, 27, when AI is going to equal everything. Scarcity used to be the center of our economy, and scarcity is now disappearing. Scarcity in the sense that a very few group people had access to a certain amount of knowledge. The internet increased that to some extent, but if you went to school and did an MBA and you understand it, data much better than anybody else, very few people could really get that. Now you can do it in 3 minutes on Gemini. So you don't have to be the world's smartest data analyst. So, when all things are equal, what matters in leadership? That's the question you have to ask yourself.
Yeah. And I think people are starting to see that and struggle. I worry about, kids that are at kids' age that are coming up into this world. Like, what a different world, and it's changing so fast. Who knows? So being in that peacock, let's say you're in a company, which a lot of people who listen to this podcast are, right? They're young leaders, or they're up and coming leaders, or they're working their way through whether their own business or someone else's business or whatever. How do they apply that to their own life, like their own business, their own workplace? How do you not be a duck? How do you be a peacock in that manner? What does that look like?
I think the first thing you need to do is you need to think of ways to put yourself in an uncomfortable situations, in situations that take you outside your comfort zone. Because if you're in your comfort zone, you're a duck. If you're in if things are fine and everything's safe and secure and comfy, like that warm blanket I mentioned, it's probably uncomfortable. It's not comfortable. It's the opposite. You're at risk. So you need to find ways to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation where you develop or you use your skills of intelligence and survival, and however you've achieved your success in life, you need to really hone those in those uncomfortable situations. And that will teach you a very important lesson, which is success through either provocation or challenging the status quo or taking a fight out there for something that people really care about that no one's willing to do, but do it in an intelligent way. Like, find a way to become heard. If you're invisible, you're a duck. If you have a point of view, you're on your way to becoming a peacock. And, if there's something that you're working on in your company that no one wants to touch, that might be a good thing for you to lean in on and figure out a solution. Don't go in the room with everybody hanging out and solving what everybody else wants to solve. Go into the room that nobody wants to go into and figure out a really good solution. It may not succeed, but you will be rewarded for trying. To me, that's the key to becoming a duck. Not, there's a very uncomfortable mindset in this country of people who they don't, when the boss, i.e., the person who's more authority, has more authority than you, comes into the room, people defer, even if they have the better idea. So,
Mm-hmm.
because someone comes in and will say, I've got a great idea. We need to go backwards a step. And
Mm.
everybody's like, oh, wow, that's really profound. That's a really interesting thought. And then the boss will walk in and they'll say, yeah, backwards. And he'll go, that's nuts. We're going to go forwards. Oh, yeah, let's go forwards.
Yeah.
No, stand up in the room and say, well, hold on a second. I'm the contrarian. And we as a company should value contrarians because contrarians challenge groupthink. And
Mm-hmm.
groupthink leads to average, to duck world. So you need to think in terms of the contrarian and make your point. Don't shrink because the person with authority comes in. Be respectful, be thoughtful, but be bold. Stand you're with your intelligence. You didn't get to where you are because you're stupid. You're smart.
Mm-hmm.
Stop giving away your superpower, which is your ability to reason. And even if you're truth to power. That's
Now,
really my advice.
has anyone ever done that to you in a meeting?
Absolutely, all the time.
Yeah. And
And
they
I
probably know
reward
that.
that.
Yeah. How do you reward it? Because a lot of leaders, I'll say this, like one of the most important things to create it, they say the best teams, right? Google's done a ton of studies on this and so forth. The best teams by far have exactly what you're talking about, which is psychological safety, which is the ability to speak truth to power, the ability to say, I respectfully disagree. I think this is a better idea, whatever. And that the leader in the room in the moment, which it can feel like an attack, right? It can feel a little scary. It can feel uncomfortable to your point. But I always have people say to me in those moments as the leader, what's the way that you handle that? So you say you reward that, right? And I will hear leaders say to me, oh, yeah, I'm fine with that, but they never do it. Or I said, what do you do when that moment comes up? And often they can't describe it because I even wonder what it really looks like to someone else besides them. But I'm saying to you, when you say you reward it, what does reward it look like in the moment?
I mean, each leader obviously engages with their teams differently. My situation, I think it's everything from, we have reward for being the contrarian. When we have meetings where we're trying to hash out ideas and we look for the person to come in, because when you think about, what ultimately wins in these types of meetings where you're really trying to figure out a solution to a problem. And in those situations, the person in the room who wears the bowler hat, the business person, they're very thoughtful, typically logical and rational. Then you have the strategy person who wears, the graduate hat. And then you might have a magician in the room who's always just so articulate and comes up with such an incredible solution. But then the Joker walks in the room with the Joker's hat and says something really stupid. And everyone stops and goes, holy shit, that's brilliant. That is so great. So you want that. You want the
Mm.
Joker hat. You want
Mm-hmm.
somebody to say something stupid because stupidity, at the very least, challenges groupthink, right? If you're ever in a brainstorm, you should try this sometime. You start out and you say, okay, we have a problem we need to solve. Let's all put our heads together and solve the problem. And then people will work for 20 minutes and they'll come up with an idea and they'll all be passionate about that idea and they'll present it. And then you look at it and you go like, it's nothing
Average.
great there. Average. And then I'll say to them like, okay, let's put the group think aside, go back in the room and fight it out and come back with a better idea. And then they go in the room and they push, they pull, they argue, they debate, and they come back with a great idea. Because there's that first phase of ideation where people tend to be too genteel to each other. They're just like too neighborly, Nobody smacks anyone across the face. Nobody argues. No one's passionate. Everybody's like, I think this idea deserves a walnut. Oh, yes, a walnut. That's brilliant. Maybe a peanut. Peanut's better. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, but let's do that. Peanut.
Or worse, it's both. How about a peanut and a walnut? Okay, and then
Let's
they just
put them
add
together.
on.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's make these two one thing. Yeah.
So,
God, you're so right.
so I think a way of rewarding contrarianness is to push beyond average and reward it. Have meetings where you welcome thoughts from people and reward them. And
Yeah. Now I have so much insight into you You're such a little provocateur, even in like a dinner party. So that's interesting.
That's supposed to, yeah. Well, I always find the most interesting conversation comes from that,
Yeah,
even
it
in,
does.
because regular conversation can be also kind of like, how are you? I'm fine. What are you up to? Not much. How are the kids? Oh, they're great. How's
Yeah.
school? You know,
Yeah. 100%.
so
Where's that thought that's, nobody wants to say, or everybody's thinking, or something's happening, or just gets
you got
people
to wake
going.
up the room. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're good at that too, which is wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, because you're really a creativity and a strategic, you're both strategy and creativity agency when I think about it. But like, how do you balance those two things? Like your creative side, and then like, how do we use this creativity for business, and how do we balance those two things? Is it
Well,
different people, or is it the same person?
so the difference between strategy and creativity is strategy is where are you going? Where's the finish line? And creativity is how you get there. So a lot of people say, oh, I want to be creative. Let's be creative. Okay, well, to what end? For what reason? Like, what is the business goal? I always say to people,
Mm-hmm.
like, what is the business goal here? What are you trying to solve? Because if you just think of it as a race. If I say, okay, and go, and everybody starts running, where are you running to? Strategy is what is the goal and what is the strategic insight that helps us get there? And then the creativity is taking that and coming up with the means by which you achieve that goal.
I've
So,
never heard it like that. That's cool. Yeah,
so I think
that
those are the
the
two
means.
things. And it's
Yeah.
often two people, occasionally can be the same person, but someone who's a really good strategist is someone who can take a very complex picture and make it sound super simple. A really
Mm.
bad strategist is someone who takes something that's really simple and makes it sound so complicated. That's like basic, It's
I
true.
love it. It's
Yeah.
true. I'm even thinking for myself, like, how often do I do that? Yeah, that's a good point. Listening to you, I'm wondering because when you were growing up, okay, in your kind of formative years, what did you do? I think you played hockey, but like, what did you do that kind of formed some of these ideas too? Do you know what I mean? Like, what experiences did you have growing up? Some people, they're musicians, some people are actors, some people play sports. Like, what was the thing that you think, oh, this kind of formed how I come alive, or how I compete, or how I think?
I think a lot of those things you mentioned, some of my formative years obviously were in my home. And I grew up in a house with four sisters, all of them very smart and very articulate and loved to argue. So we debated everything. Doesn't matter what it was. It could have been like the time for dinner. It could have been, the cross-cutting implications of, the I don't know, like we had a party in Canada when I grew up called the Rhinoceros Party, and we had debates around the Rhinoceros Party because it was the party everyone voted for because they didn't want to vote for any other of the established parties. So we would talk, debate everything. And I think that really helped me understand like strategic thinking, how I could
Mm,
win an argument in that complex, very
that's cool.
emotional world. And then playing hockey, let's see, I think hockey, we were a very small school and we ended up winning the championships, the top championships in Canada. We were like 200 kids, 250 kids, and like men and women, male and female. And yet we had a small hockey team and we ended up beating all these big schools. And I guess from a small age, I always believed that you don't have to be big and famous to win. You
Mm,
just need to be smart and you need to work hard
mm.
and you need to treat people well and kind, and that you can do that. I also think being Canadian was very influential because as a kid, as a Canadian, we would study every other country because we'd always compare it to ourselves, So we knew everything about America, we knew everything about Texas, we knew everything about
That
every
country in
country,
Texas, the
that
country in
other
Texas.
planet. Yeah. No, but we knew everything. I mean, as a kid, I knew, if you think about what does a young kid know, we used to study, Sweden and social democracies and how things were solved in other countries. And I think it just made us stronger mentally, allowed us to, I guess, absorb all the really smart ideas coming from all over the planet. And I think that helped to make us feel more confident, made me feel more
Mm.
confident.
Yeah. So how's that lead into where you are now? Like you've been running this company for decades, right?
Yeah.
And
My God, long time.
I mean, long time. I mean, we're all
Yeah.
in the same boat in that way. And you're moving into this new kind of role a bit, right? Of as
Yeah.
chairman and founder and stepping back in this way. And I'm sure that means stepping into new opportunities or new things, or maybe you're in the middle, like figuring that out. But what do you think's next for you? Do you know? You have any sense?
Well, I was CEO of Strawberry Frog for 27 years, and it's a long time. And, you do all the things we've been talking about, and then you go home and you do all the real work, all
Mm,
the operational work, the financial
mm,
work, the planning, etc. And I just decided that that side of my life I've done very well. We had a really good year last year. And so I've handed over the operational side the company to an amazing group of people. Our new
mhm,
CEO, Steve Scoloretto, is an extraordinary leader in the advertising marketing world, innovation world. He's led some of the best companies in the industry on both coasts. He's has an extraordinary track record across just a really broad range of companies, everything from retail to technology and travel and air, just a really amazing track record. And he's a really good guy and
mm,
really enjoy him as a person. And I think that's the biggest challenge when you hand over, a CEO role is having someone you trust is too simple a word. I think it's much multidimensional. Some of the things I mentioned to intellectual capacity and drive for greatness. And there's
mm.
so much, in that aspect of it. And he's all of those things. And around him, he has a dozen folks who are very senior executives who are leading the company. And so it's the perfect time for me to take on this chairman role, which really lets me think more about the future,
Mm.
about where the industry's going, what kind of partnerships are we going to need moving forward. And we're already moving in that space with some extraordinary, we're actually going to announce a huge partnership in the near future. So that's where my energy is right now. And a couple of client engagements where I've been asked to lean in. I'm trying to let others step up. So I'm not the kind of boss that tries to control their own situation. I'm more happy to put people forward.
Well, that's one of the things I'd say that I get the most questions about when I'm out working with companies. There's generally two super popular topics that people struggle with. One is difficult conversations. That's one
Yeah.
thing. And the second, and conflict, which you kind of talked about in embracing that, right? Being the contrarian. But the second thing is this whole idea of delegation and letting things go and being able to be okay having other people step up and take over, whether it's for clients or whether it's this. And I find leaders at all levels are struggling with that. Any
Hmm.
thoughts as you are doing it in the biggest way possible? I mean, you're really giving your baby over, right? You're saying, here, you go ahead and raise it now. But any tips for folks that you can see on that?
I mean, we all need to grow as people, and it's very easy to get stale. It's very easy to live in a default mode where you're constantly think about how complex it is to drive a car, right? How many things you need to do really well at the same time. And yet you don't think of anything when you're driving. You just kind of nod your head to the music and, that's called default mode, meaning your brain is turned off and you're in the zone. That's not a good place to be. You're not sharp. You're not provocative. You're not questioning. You're not curious. So, we all need to grow stronger. And if you're a leader and you're constantly keeping people away from taking more responsibility, you're not growing. And I think that's a disservice to companies and businesses and organizations. The role of a leader is to make other people successful.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't do that, you're not doing, then if you're in a company that you're not given that opportunity, then you should leave and find another place or have an open conversation and say, look, I need to grow. I need to grow stronger. I need to grow because when I grow, this company grows. And great leaders will see that and know that and reward that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. There's so many good little nuggets here today. I hope you guys have been listening and figuring out how not to be a duck. I know that
Don't be a
one.
duck,
I'm gonna be I'm gonna be
be a
worried about
peacock.
that. Be a
Mm,
peacock, not a duck. And
yeah.
that whole idea also I think that everybody can take away is how do you differentiate yourself? in this time of AI, I think one thing is, how does your job differ from what AI can do? Huge. Like just that, you made me have that like aha moment of like all people are looking at like, how do I differentiate my talk to my boss over something that an email that someone else is sending from AI is generating? Any of that. I thought that was a really
Yeah.
cool thought. So anyway, thank you so much, Scott, for joining us today and for giving us a little bit of your time and your background. And I'm looking forward to seeing how you grow in this next phase and also how the wonderful work that Strawberry Frog is going to continue to do. So thanks so much.
What a pleasure. Thank you for having me. A lot of fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for spending time here on Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'd like to give a special shout out to our podcast producer, Richard Francisco. Check out our notes for any details. And if you want to get anything more out of this, go to our YouTube channel and please subscribe to Leadership Lab TV. If you heard something today, of course, that resonated with you, do something with it. It's all about the choices that you make. It's what you say in conversations, how you show up in a moment. Share this episode with someone who's maybe starting a new job or stepping into a new level of leadership, and try one idea because it just might create some pretty powerful leadership ripple effects. Until next time, keep stepping in because the room changes when you do.